Sounds good. Sounds good. Awesome. Well, thank you all, worship band. What an amazing time. Yes, if we have not met, my name is Micah, and I have the opportunity and privilege to preach today. Me and my wife, Chloe, just moved to Nebraska, in Lincoln, Nebraska, about 6 months ago. So we're just getting used to all the cold weather, all the fun things, and it's been an amazing change. It's been amazing to see what God's been doing and how God's provided. And one of those things is I get to come and be with y'all this morning, and it's a privilege. As I start out, I want to share about one of my weaknesses in the faith. Like, if I can level with you, one of the worst things I do in my faith is actually stand up for my faith. See, when I was growing up, I became a Christian at a young age, and I even became a paid Christian for almost 5 years now. But still, I struggle to stand up for my faith. And that's what we'll be talking about today, standing for your faith in Daniel chapter 3. We're going to see how 3 Hebrew men who are about 18 to 22 years old stood for their faith. But when I think about that, when I read the book of Daniel, I don't see that in my own life. In fact, when I was a senior in college, in my last semester, I actually got a job at the church that I was going to in their college ministry. And the college ministry was just starting up, so I had one job, start a Bible study. But funny enough, for some reason, I didn't invite my classmates. It's not because they didn't need God, it's not because I didn't have the opportunity, but I let the fear of rejection keep me from sharing the gospel with them. It even got so bad. I remember going to class, and at this time, I knew most people in my classes. I was a senior, so most of the classes were the same. But I remember every time I'd try to muster the courage to talk to them, I'd get in my head, and I'd talk, and I'd think about, what if it's a weird, awkward silence? What if they say no? What if they reject me? And it got so bad that after I graduated, we walked outside, we took pictures, and it was December, so it was like 50 degrees in Georgia, so it was nice. And I remember I dapped up a guy, and I was like, see you, man, have a good one. And it hit me. I'm never going to see this person again. Yet I let the fear of rejection keep me from sharing the gospel with them and inviting them to my Bible study. And I think all of us at some level fear the rejection of others. All of us at some level have people in our lives that we're afraid, if I stand for the gospel, they will reject me. And this doesn't make sense. Backing down from our belief of the God of this universe to just appease a mere human doesn't make sense. But that's the thing about fear. Fear makes us do irrational things. And so I'm preaching, not as someone who has mastered standing for their faith, but honestly someone who still struggles. Even this week, I was working out with a friend. He's in his early 30s. I just met him in Lincoln, and I was going to invite him to read the Bible together. And we worked out for an hour and 20 minutes, and I waited until the last 20 minutes to ask him because I was nervous. And so today, I want you to take a moment and pause. I want you to think about the person whom you're most afraid, if you stood for your faith, they would reject you. And the reason why this is hard is because in those circumstances, with those people, it's actually so ingrained in our lives, in our even bodies, to back down from our faith, that it's like second nature. And what God has to do, since God is a loving Father, He doesn't want us to stay there, continuing to bow from our faith. He actually wants to teach us to stand for our faith. And the way He does that is by testing our faith. So God will put us in situations where we either have to stand up for our faith or back down from our faith. And He'll test our faith so we can learn to stand for our faith. I call these tests the burn test. And for today, here's our definition of it. A burn test is a situation in which God allows the pressure of this world to either make us stand up for our faith or back down from our faith. I get the phrase the burn test from old leather workers. And what they would do is to test if it was a real piece of leather, they would put it over a flame. And if it burned up, it wasn't real leather. But if it could withstand the flame, it was authentic leather. And God will do the same thing. God will allow us to go through the pressures of this world, the burn test, so we can learn to stand for our faith. And typically, the burn test comes in the moments where we're most afraid to stand for our faith. Whether that's a family member, a coworker, a classmate, or the people you thought about just a minute ago. And so today, my goal is to move you away from backing down from your faith and toward standing for your faith. I want us, the next time we're in those situations, to stand for our faith and not back down. And so in our story, in Daniel chapter 3, we're going to see how three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I'll call them the big three, and we're going to see how they stood for their faith in Daniel chapter 3. And we're going to see three things. One, we're going to see that there's a pressure to bow. Two, we're going to see that you can stand. And three, we're going to see that God stands with you. In this story, we will see that there's a pressure to back away and bow down from your faith. Number two, we're going to see that you can stand, and we're going to see that you can stand because God stands with you. So let's start out in Daniel chapter 3. A little backstory. So a little backstory. In Daniel chapter 1, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the big three, were brought from their homeland to into a foreign land. And they were made to conform to this pagan land, this land that did not worship God. But in that time, when they were 14, 15 years old, they made a resolve to obey God and not defile themselves in this new land. And they had small acts of obedience, but now we're going to see where that leads them. So pick up with me in Daniel chapter 3, verse 1, and it says this: King Nebuchadnezzar, I'll call him King Neb, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth was 6 cubits, meaning this statue, covered in gold, was like 9 stories high and as wide as an SUV. And he says he put it in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So meaning there's a plain, it's a flat land. We came from Georgia, me and Chloe, so there's trees everywhere. You can't see very far, but here you can see for miles. So imagine you're driving into Lincoln and you see the Capitol building. You can see it as you drive into Lincoln, as you drive through Lincoln, as you drive past Lincoln. All you can see is the Capitol building. In the same way, there's a flat land with a 9-story statue that everyone can see. Then we pick up in verse 2, and it says this: Then King Neb sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image that King Neb had set up. Then the satraps, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province gathered for the dedication of the image that King Neb had set up. And they stood before the image that King Neb had set up. So what is the author doing here? He's repeated the same thing over and over again. So back in the day, in Hebrew, they didn't have exclamation points. So what they would do to emphasize something is to repeat it over and over again. So what Daniel wants you to know is that everybody and their dog was here to worship the statue. That you look out on this plain, and all you can see is this giant statue and thousands of people here to worship this statue. But not just anybody, influential people. I mean, this is like the president, the governor, Matt Rule, and everyone come down here to worship the statue. The idea is that King Neb is setting up an environment where all you can see is a giant statue and thousands of influential people. So he's not only affecting what they see, but who they see as well. And in verse 4, it says, And the herald proclaimed aloud, You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, basically a huge band, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Neb has set up. Verse 6. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. So again, imagine this. You're there. You're in a crowd of thousands of people in front of this giant golden statue that's like glistening in the sun, and you can feel the heat of this giant fiery furnace. And this guy's yelling at everyone saying, if you do not bow, you'll be chunked into the fire. So what do we see? Verse 7. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, it says all the peoples and nations and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Neb had set up. And we see that all of them fell down to worship, except for 3 men. Let's see in verse 8. It says, therefore, at this certain time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews, and they declared, King Neb, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of providence of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, again, the big 3. And these men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Now, this is crazy to me. Imagine you're there. Imagine you see this giant statue, thousands of people. And in your mind, are you thinking, well, in my heart, I'll stand for God, but with my body, I'll bow. The big 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't say, well, I've obeyed God now. I'm due for one disobedience, but I'll obey him next time. I'll bow now, but then I'll stand up later. No, they stood in the midst of all the pressure to bow, in the midst of all the pressures of a giant statue, all the crowd, they stood for their faith. So let's see where this gets them. Verse 13. Then King Neb, in a furious and in a rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they were brought to these men before the king. And King Neb answered them and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? What's amazing is that they bow down in front of, or that they stand in front of all these thousands of people who bow down. So King Neb, he thinks, if I bring him in my presence, he's like, I'm the most powerful man in the world. If I bring him, look him face to face, eye to eye, they will bow. And for many of us, we won't be in front of a king, but we'll be in situations where it'll feel like we should bow from our faith instead of stand for our faith. Let me give a few. Thanksgiving, Thursday, you're with your family. You have some people who aren't believers. Are you going to stand for your faith, or are you going to bow down from your faith? It's Christmas. Everyone goes to church on Christmas. Are you going to invite your neighbors and coworkers, or are you going to get in your head like me and back down from your faith? We have to ask, why do we back down from our faith? It doesn't make sense, right? There's the God of this universe. Why would we back down to appease a mere human? Well, here's 3 reasons I believe we back down. 1, comfort. 2, value. And 3, faith. Why do we back down? 1, comfort. When you don't sin in a group, you make everyone else in the room feel uncomfortable. You stand out. And it's more comfortable to bow, but it's uncomfortable to stand. Number 2, value. We feel less valuable when we are rejected. In these situations, we are actually getting too much value from the acceptance of others. So it's hard to stand for God when your self-worth is at risk. 3, faith. You have more faith that not standing for God leads to the most fulfilled life in God. So we see this huge pressure that they're in. What does this look like practically? What does it look like to stand for your faith in the midst of the pressure to bow? Well, one of my coworkers, her name's Audrey, and when she was in college, she came into college like a lukewarm Christian. She had one foot in the Bible, one foot in the world. In her first semester, she was sinning, and she was living in that. But after she went to a conference, she felt convicted by God to give up that sin. And when she came back from that conference in the next semester, her friends invited her to continue to smoke weed. But she said no. Because God empowered her, because God gave her a resolve, she said no, and she took a stand for God. So in your life, you're going to have opportunities to sin or stand up for your faith. You'll have opportunities to share the gospel or back down. And Audrey was able to stand for her faith because she knew that God's life was most fulfilled for her. That's our second point, that you can stand. Let's look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. What an amazing thing. They stood face to face with the most powerful man in the world and said no. They stood face to face and said, no, we're not going to bow from our faith. So where does that strength come from? Well, it doesn't come from them. It actually comes from God. Look back in the passage. It said, our God is able to deliver us. Or it said, our God will deliver us. Meaning their strength to stand came from God's ability and God's character. It was God's ability and God's character that empowered them to stand for their faith. And what's amazing is that their faith wasn't just, if he does this, I'll obey him. They said, even if he doesn't save me, I'll still obey him. Even if God says no to this prayer, I'll still obey him. And what a powerful faith that is. They had the faith to not only stand and look the king of Babylon in the eyes and say, no, we will not bow. But they had the faith and trust in God that he would rescue them. And even if he did not, they would rather be thrown into a fiery furnace than bow to an idol. And so for us, how do we stand? How do we practically stand for our faith? Well, there's a leading researcher and author in the field of psychology, Brene Brown, and she says this: don't shrink back, don't puff up, but stand your ground. When you feel the pressure to bow down from your faith, don't shrink back from your faith, don't puff up, but stand your ground, respectfully and directly. When you see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they said, O king, several times. They were respectful, but they were also direct. They said, we have no need to answer in this. We will not bow. So where does this get them? Where does their obedience to God get them in the story? Let's look at verse 19. Then King Neb was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Basically, he was ticked off. And he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times more than it usually was heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into a burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, their garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Add so much detail there. Get the mightiest men, bind up their cloaks and their hats. What's the author saying? He's saying that their fates were sealed. He's saying there was no getting them out of the situation. They had the strongest men in the kingdom, and they bound every single part of them. Their fates were sealed. Let's continue on. And he says, because the king's order was urgent, the furnace overheated, and the flame killed those men who took the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell to the bound, burning in the fiery furnace. That's crazy. So, how does the story end? Does King Neb get to prove to everyone that he's the most powerful man in the universe? Does he get to prove this is what happens when you stand, you get chunked in the fire? What's crazy is that as everyone was looking back to this giant statue, something caught their eye. Let's go in verse 24. Then King Neb was astonished and rose in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said, to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the fourth, is like the Son of God's." What an amazing thing! How crazy is that they're not dead? How crazy is it that there's a 4th man? And his appearance is so powerful, his appearance is so magnificent, that it draws their attention away from this giant statue toward the fiery furnace. Like, how amazing is that God's protecting them? The same men who threw him in there actually died, but they're walking around the fire. They're not burned. They're not hurt. Think about from their perspective. They had all the pressure to bow. They are at peace with their life about to end, being thrown in the fiery furnace, yet they're alive. And that's our third point. When you have the opportunity to stand for your faith, you can stand because God stands with you. You have the courage to stand because God stands with you. We see the Son of God protecting him in the fiery furnace. Remember, again, the mighty men died when they were close to the fire. They're walking in the fire. And this is the greatest hope for courage, that God stands with us. The word God with us in the Bible is Emmanuel. You've probably heard this at Christmas. It was Jesus' first word, or first name given to him. Emmanuel, God with us. But here's the crazy thing. The only thing that kept him alive in the fire is Emmanuel. The only thing that gave them the courage to stand is Emmanuel. And so the greatest news for the big three is that the Son of God stands with them. And the best news for us is that God will stand with us. All the pressure they face, the angry king, the giant statue, the fire, yet they stood because God was standing with them. And because Jesus is standing with you, you can stand. Even if you're trembling in your boots, you know that God stands with you when he calls you to stand. And you don't have to stand on your own strength because Jesus is already standing with you. The same Jesus who created fire and who created you stands with you in the fire. So when you go through the metaphorical burn test with the opportunity to back down from your faith or stand up for your faith, when you go through the burn test, you have to know that you are fireproof, that the fire can't touch you. That if you're going to stand, you have to know that you are fireproof, because when Jesus is with you, the fire can't touch you. And when a leather worker lights a flame over a real piece of leather, it doesn't burn up. And when Christians go through the burn test, they can stand because Jesus is already standing with you. His presence teaches us how to stand for our faith. But we don't just stand to puff up our own Christian status. We stand because God will change lives through your stance. Let's see at verse 26. And it says, "Then King Neb came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, 'Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here.' Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the kings and counselors gathered together, and they saw the fire had no power over them. The bodies of these men, their hair on their heads were not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, there was no smell of fire that came upon them. And King Neb answered and said, 'Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and has set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any God except their own.'" Here's an amazing thing. When you stand for God, people turn away from their idols and toward God. When you stand for God, people are convicted of their sin and turn toward God. Why? Because when God's people stand for their faith, people change. Everyone will notice, but God will even use that to change their hearts. So why is it so important that you stand for your faith? because God will use that stance to change hearts. When you're at Thanksgiving and you pray, or you talk to your family, you have that hard conversation and share the gospel, they will not only hear the words coming out of your mouth, but they will see your faith in action. They will not only hear the good news come from your mouth, but they will see your faith as you take a stand. And where does our strength come from? To move away from the fear of rejection towards standing for God, it comes from Jesus. It comes because we know in all these things we have Emmanuel. We get to say no to sin. We get to stand for our faith in our classes, at work, because of Emmanuel. And you can stand in the most terrifying moments of your life because God is with you. Let me share one of the most incredible stories of courage from the early church. In about 200 AD, there was a woman named Perpetua, and she was 22 years old. She was married. She had just gotten pregnant, and she had just become a Christian as well. But unfortunately for her, the emperor at that time would gather Christians into an arena on his birthday and let wild animals tear them to pieces. And unfortunately for Perpetua, she was one of those women, one of those Christians. But as she was in jail, she prayed to God that she would have the baby early so that she could go and be a martyr. And when God answered that prayer, a Roman soldier mocked her, saying, "You're in pain now, but wait until you get into the arena." And this is what she said: "Right now I suffer alone, but in there the one inside me will suffer for me, and I will suffer for him." And when she goes into the arena, she gets thrown on the ground by this wild bull. And as she's staggering up, there's thousands of people in the crowd cheering for the Christians to be murdered. And her final request is to get a hairpin for her hair, because she doesn't want her messy hair to make people think that she was mourning in her hour of triumph. How is that possible? How can someone stand for their faith while being martyred for it? How can Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stand for their faith face to face with the king? What did they understand that we have to understand if we're going to stand for our faith? And it's this: that there is a fourth man in the fire. That they could stand for their faith because they understood that God was with them. And we can stand for our faith because God is with us. Perpetua was able to stand in triumph because she knew that God was with her. And we get to stand because we have that same hope. We have the hope that there's a fourth man in the fire. So when you're in the fire, you're never alone in the fire. And you get to stand because God stands with you. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for allowing us to gather here. Thank you so much for moving and being with us. God, I thank you so much that we get to not be alone in those hard moments. That when we are called to stand, when the pressure is on, God, we know that you will stand with us. God, I pray that you will empower us based on your power and your character, that we'll be able to stand because you stood with us and for us. God, thank you so much for standing for us. Even on the cross, you hung there for us so we didn't have to. And God, I thank you that we get to have that free gift of salvation, God. Father, I pray that we get to walk in that today and this week and in the next month, when we have the pressure to back down from our faith, whether that's in front of our families, our coworkers, God, that you'll give us the power to stand. And God, I pray that when we do stand, that you will change people's hearts. They will convict people of their sin. That you'll move in their midst, not because of how great we are, but because of how great you are. So God, I pray that you move mightily, and I pray that you give us the power to stand. In Jesus' name, Amen.